I'll use her fat body for one night. Drunk man yelled. Mountain man broke his jaw. I paid for whiskey, so I own the girl, the drunk bellowed, yanking Hannah Morrison by the wrist as Blackwater's saloon hooted and roared. Cards slapped tables, boots thumped floorboards, and a winter wind rattled the shutters like a warning no one heard. Pike, the owner, polished a glass that didn't need polishing and looked anywhere but at the girl being dragged toward the stairs. Hannah's apron was flour-dusted, her cheeks wind-burned from late-night walks home, her voice steady only because it had to be. "Please, sir, I'm here to serve drinks, nothing more." Laughter rose. Someone called her names meant to bruise. The drunk, Garrett, a mine hand with a mean streak, leaned in loud enough for the piano to go silent. "She's a big one, warm enough for the winter, boys." Shame lit her face like a match. She tried to pull free. His knuckles whitened. That was when the doors blew inward and the cold followed a man inside. He filled the frame the way a mountain fills a horizon. Broad-shouldered, weather-cut, eyes the color of steel at dusk. A bear fur coat hung from him like a shadow. 2 revolvers rode his hips, calm as sleeping dogs that could wake mean. No one needed his name to know it, but the room whispered it anyway. Kale Ironside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Let the lady go." Garrett laughed, a sound with no future. "And if I don't?" Kale stepped once, the floorboards answering with a groan. "Then you'll learn the hard way what you should have learned the easy way. A woman's not yours to take." If you're hearing this from Saigon or Seattle, a dorm room or a night shift station, tell me where you are right now. Because you know this moment. The instant the room decides whether it will look away or stand up. Blackwater was the kind of town that ate good people slowly. Coal dust lived in the air, whiskey in the blood, and mercy, if it existed at all, hid behind locked doors. Hannah Morrison had learned that the hard way. She had come to this place after her parents died of fever, leaving her with nothing but a worn photograph and the weight of debts that weren't hers. Her body was soft, her voice gentle, and in a world that worshipped steel and swagger, gentleness was a curse. Pike, the saloon owner, had hired her because no one else would. "Big girls work harder," he'd said with a sneer. He'd been right about the work, but wrong about the girl. Hannah worked harder because she had no choice, not because she didn't know her worth. Every night was the same. Sticky floors, loud laughter, men who thought kindness meant permission. She learned to move like a ghost, eyes down, smile ready. But ghosts can bleed too. When Garrett grabbed her that night, it wasn't just her wrist he took. It was every ounce of dignity she'd tried to keep alive in that place. His friends laughed, the piano player looked away, and even Pike pretended to be busy polishing glasses. Until Kale Ironside walked through the door. Kale wasn't a stranger to ugliness. He had seen enough of it on the frontier, men who thought violence made them gods. The scar across his face wasn't decoration, it was history. Rumor said he'd killed a bear with his bare hands, that he'd once fought 6 men in a canyon and walked out alone. But the truth was simpler. He hated bullies. When he saw Garrett dragging the girl, something inside him, something old and feral, snapped back to life. "Let her go," he'd said. Garrett had laughed, just like so many others before him had laughed before they learned fear. "You want her? Buy her a drink, mountain man." Hannah had looked up then into those gray eyes, and for the first time all night she saw someone who wasn't amused by her pain. Kale's jaw flexed. "You've had enough drinks." Garrett's fist flew. It never landed. Kale's counterpunch cracked through the noise like a rifle shot. Garrett hit the floor, his jaw shattered, his pride leaking with the blood from his mouth. The laughter died instantly. No one moved. Even the fire in the stove seemed to pause. Kale turned to Pike, who was frozen behind the bar. "You let this happen in your place?" Pike stammered. I didn't." "You did nothing," Kale cut him off. "You'll sell me this saloon tonight. I'll pay cash. You'll take it and never come back." The man's eyes widened, but Kale's hand rested casually on his revolver. Pike nodded fast. Within an hour the deed was signed, the money counted, and Kale Ironside owned the Blackwater Saloon. He turned to Hannah, who was still trembling. Gently, he took off his heavy fur coat and placed it over her shoulders. "You're safe now," he said simply. She looked up, lips parted. "Why? Why would you?" "Because someone should have said something a long time ago," he answered, "and I'm done watching." That was how it began. The night a mountain man changed everything in a town that had forgotten what decency looked like. The next morning, Blackwater woke to rumors that spread faster than wildfire. The mountain man broke a miner's jaw and bought the whole saloon before sunrise. No one knew whether to fear him or thank him. Inside the newly renamed Ironside Tavern, the smell of smoke and spilled whiskey had been replaced with a clean scent of pine soap. The old piano had been pushed aside, and Hannah, still uncertain whether she was dreaming, found herself sweeping under Kale's quiet watch. "Why are you still here?" he asked, leaning against a post, arms crossed. She hesitated. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Kale nodded once. "Then you'll work here, but under my rules." He handed her a folded piece of paper. In simple, careful writing, it said, 1. No man lays a hand on you. 2. You stop working when the sun sets. 3. You eat before you serve anyone else. Hannah blinked, unsure what to say. "You wrote this? For me?" Kale shrugged. "For the saloon. But you're the reason it needed changing." That night, when she brought him stew by the fire, he was repairing one of the broken chairs. The flames cast light across his scar, and for a heartbeat she wondered what story lived behind it. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked softly. He chuckled, low and rough. "I used to. Then the world gave me too much to remember." They ate together in silence, the kind of silence that felt safe. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the town's dirt and ugliness in a fragile sheet of white. Over the next few weeks, Hannah watched Kale transform the saloon. He hired a widow to play piano, built new tables with his own hands, and banned gambling. Men who once spat on the floor now nodded politely to her as she passed. But it wasn't just the saloon that was changing. It was Hannah. The girl who once flinched at every raised voice now laughed when Kale teased her about her clumsy handwriting. The woman who once hid in corners now stood behind the bar with her shoulders straight, and when Kale walked in from the cold, brushing snow from his coat, her heart thudded in a way that frightened her and warmed her all at once. One evening, a storm rolled in fierce and sudden, trapping them both inside after closing. The wind howled through the gaps in the window frames, and the fire hissed in protest. Kale brought in more wood, his coat soaked, his hair dripping. Hannah rushed to help, taking the logs from his arms. "You'll catch cold," she said. He smiled faintly. "I've had worse." When she reached to hang his coat by the fire, her fingers brushed his, rough skin, warm even after the snow. Time seemed to slow. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Kale spoke first, voice soft but certain. "You don't have to thank me for that night. You didn't owe anyone an apology for surviving. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. No one's ever said that to me before. He reached up, wiping a tear with the back of his knuckle. Then it's long overdue. They stood there, the storm raging outside, two people who had lived too long in silence finding something that felt like peace. When the fire burned low, Kale threw one last log onto the flames. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll learn to ride. I'll teach you myself." She blinked, startled. "Ride? I've never—" "Then it's time," he interrupted gently. "You should know what freedom feels like." That night, long after he went upstairs, Hannah sat alone by the dying fire, holding his note of rules in her hands. She whispered the last one aloud. "You eat before you serve anyone else." And for the first time in her life, she believed she might finally deserve it. By the end of winter, the Ironside Tavern no longer smelled of sweat and whiskey, but of wood polish, stew, and bread rising in the oven. Kale's rule, "No one touches the staff, no one disrespects the weak," had turned a den of violence into something strange for Blackwater, a refuge. But Hannah's favorite part wasn't the saloon. It was the cabin on the ridge. Kale had built it years ago, half stone, half timber, tucked in a clearing above the river where the snow melted first in spring. He began taking Hannah there on supply trips. At first, she protested. "You need help hauling crates, that's all," she'd asked. He'd smiled in that quiet way of his. "That's what I told myself, too." The cabin was small but strong. Its roof slanted low, its hearth deep and wide. When they arrived, Kale always lit the fire first thing, his hands practiced and sure. Hannah would unpack supplies, coffee, flour, jerky, and line them up neatly while the warmth spread through the room. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable, familiar. The only sounds were the crackle of pine logs and the soft rhythm of her voice when she hummed to herself. One evening, when the snow was melting and the river began to roar louder, Kale found her standing outside, coat wrapped around her shoulders, staring toward the valley. He stepped beside her. "You're thinking about leaving." She shook her head. "No, I'm thinking about belonging. I don't know which one scares me more." Kale leaned against the porch rail. "When I was younger, I left everything behind. My father's fists, my mother's tears. I thought being alone meant being safe, but it just meant being cold longer." Hannah turned to him, her eyes bright in the dusk. "And now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Now I know warmth when I see it." That night they shared dinner by the fire. She'd cooked rabbit stew, and though it was simple, Kale ate it like it was feast day fare. When she apologized for burning the bread, he shook his head. "It's perfect," he said. "You made it." Her laugh was soft, shy. "You're a terrible liar." He grinned, a rare, genuine smile that made his scar look almost gentle. "Maybe, but I'm a good judge of effort." Over the weeks, he began teaching her things: how to start a fire with one strike, how to aim a rifle, how to read tracks in the snow. She struggled, stumbled, and laughed until she couldn't breathe. Each time she faltered, he was there, steady and patient, his big hands covering hers to show her the right grip. One afternoon, while trying to split wood, the axe slipped and grazed her palm. She hissed in pain, and before she could react, Kale was already kneeling beside her. He took her hand, turned it gently, and wrapped it with a clean strip of cloth from his pocket. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "I am," she whispered. "But you make it hard to think straight." Their eyes met, and the air between them felt different, charged, fragile, alive. He didn't move, didn't speak, just kept his hand on hers a little longer than he needed to. When he finally stood, he said softly, "You're not what they said you were, Hannah." She frowned. "And what did they say?" "That you were weak, that you didn't matter." He paused, searching her face. "But I've seen you lift more weight than most men, just to keep going. I've seen you turn shame into grace. That strength I'll never forget." She looked away, blinking fast, the warmth of his words deeper than any fire. Later, when the stars rose over the ridge, she sat outside with a blanket around her shoulders. Kale joined her with 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't say anything, just sat close enough that their shoulders brushed. They watched the constellations in silence until he said, "Tomorrow, I'll take you up the North Trail. There's a lake there that freezes clear as glass. When the sun hits it, it looks like heaven's floor." She smiled. "And if I fall through it?" "I'll pull you out," he said. "That's a promise." The wind carried the smell of pine and smoke. The world felt suspended, held in that fragile balance between fear and faith. Inside the cabin, the firelight flickered against the walls, painting 2 shadows that leaned closer and closer, as if the mountain itself had drawn them together. Spring arrived like a reluctant apology. The snow withdrew from the valley, leaving behind muddy trails and swollen rivers. Flowers tried to bloom along the fence posts outside Ironside Tavern, but inside, Hannah could feel another kind of storm gathering, a quiet unease that even Kale's steady presence couldn't dispel. It began with the rumors. Men passing through town whispered that Garrett, his jaw wired shut for months, was back. He'd healed enough to speak again, though what came out of his mouth now was poison. They said he was gathering a crew of old mining buddies, men who'd lost work when Kale took over the saloon and outlawed gambling, men eager to settle a score. Hannah overheard 2 cowhands talking about it while she served stew. Her hands trembled, and the bowl nearly slipped. When Kale looked up from across the room, she masked her fear with a smile, but he saw it anyway. Later that night, when the last customer had gone, he locked the door and said quietly, "You heard something?" She nodded. "They said Garrett's coming for you. For us." Kale set the key down on the bar, his expression unreadable. "Then he'll find what he's looking for." "Kale." He turned toward her. "Hannah, listen. There's a thing about men like him. They believe fear keeps them powerful. But when someone stands up, they lose that power. I stood up once. I'll do it again." Her voice broke. "And if he hurts you?" He stepped closer, brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. "He won't? Not while I've got something worth fighting for?" Hannah wanted to believe him. But that night, when she lay awake in the cabin, listening to the river rush below, old memories crept in. The sound of her father coughing before he died, her mother whispering that good people always pay the price. She pressed a hand to her heart and prayed that, this time, love wouldn't cost her everything. Days passed. The threat didn't come right away, but something else did. A man from the railroad company. He arrived on horseback, wearing a bowler hat and a city smile. "Mr. Ironside," he said, stepping into the saloon, "the railroad's expanding north. We're buying properties along this route, including yours." Kale leaned back in his chair. "Not for sale." The man chuckled. "Everything's for sale. You've built a fine establishment, but progress doesn't wait. I'd hate for there to be complications." Hannah, standing nearby, felt a chill. Kale's gray eyes hardened. "Tell your boss progress can ride around me." The man's smile faltered. "That kind of talk can be dangerous." Kale rose slowly, towering over him. "So am I." The man left without another word. Hannah watched him go, heart thudding. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "I protect what's mine," Kale said simply. "That includes you." Oh, she wanted to tell him that she wasn't his possession. But when she saw the look in his eyes, she realized he didn't mean it that way. To him, mine meant safe. The attack came a week later. It was near midnight. The tavern was closed, the lamps low. Hannah was upstairs folding linens when she heard the first crash, the front door splintering under a boot, then shouting, then gunfire. "Kale!" she screamed, running to the stairs. He was already there, rifle in hand, calm as stone. "Get down!" he barked, pulling her behind the counter. Bullets ripped through glass, splintering bottles behind them. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Garrett's voice thundered through the chaos. "You think you can humiliate me, Ironside? Think again. That girl, she's coming with me." Kale's jaw clenched. "You should have stayed gone." He rose from cover, fired once. The shot cracked like thunder. One of Garrett's men went down. The others hesitated. In that instant, the town marshal, warned by one of Kale's allies, stormed in from the back with deputies, rifles drawn. The rest of the gang scattered into the night, leaving Garrett behind, bleeding and howling. His revenge burned out as fast as it began. When silence returned, Kale turned to find Hannah crouched behind the bar, trembling. He dropped the rifle and knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he cupped her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears falling freely. I thought I'd lose you." He pulled her into his arms, his voice rough. "Not in this lifetime, Hannah." The next morning, the sheriff took Garrett away in irons. The railroad man reappeared soon after, this time with apologies and an offer to cooperate. Kale refused again, but something in him had shifted. That night, when the tavern was quiet, he walked with Hannah to the cabin and stood outside under the stars. "You don't have to stay here anymore," he said softly. "You could go east, start over somewhere safe." She looked up, startled. "Why would you say that?" "Because I've brought enough danger into your life." She stepped closer. "Kale, I'm not afraid of danger. I'm afraid of losing what we have. You saved me once, but you gave me something more than safety. You gave me home." For a long moment, he just stared at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. Then he said, almost a whisper, "Home's wherever you are, Hannah." The mountain wind swept between them, but neither moved. When he finally reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. The days after the attack were uneasy ones. The law had hauled Garrett away, but Blackwater didn't forget easily. Men talked in corners, and the railroad men still rode through with their polite threats. Kale could feel it. The mountain was watching, waiting for something to break. But what he didn't expect was the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed with a wax mark from the Blackwater Land Office. Inside, in the same slick handwriting as the railroad man's, were words that made Hannah's blood run cold. "Your saloon sits on land the government intends to seize for the rail expansion. Refusal to vacate will be considered obstruction. Eviction is scheduled for May 1st. Kale read it twice, his jaw tightening. Then he folded it carefully, set it on the counter, and said only, They're not taking it." Hannah's voice trembled. "Kale, if you fight them—" He looked at her. "You think I'll let another bully take what we built? Not again." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It was the same look he'd had that night in the saloon when he broke Garrett's jaw. The look of a man who'd already decided what kind of fight he was willing to die for. 2 nights before the deadline, Blackwater turned strange. The streets emptied early, lamps dimmed. Kale felt the change in the air, a heaviness that came before violence. He sent Hannah to the cabin with a few trusted friends. "If anything happens, you ride north," he told her. "I'm not leaving you." "You promised to listen." She shook her head. "Then promise you'll come back." He paused, then reached out and touched her cheek. "If I don't, it means I didn't try hard enough." The raid came just before dawn. 5 men, railroad enforcers with rifles and torches, stormed the saloon, shouting that the property was condemned. But Kale was waiting. He stepped from the shadows, rifle steady, face calm. "This land's paid for," he said. "You'll leave it standing." The leader spat. "You think you can stop progress, mountain man?" Kale's voice was ice. "I can stop you." The first shot came from the other side. Wood splintered, bottles shattered, fire caught the drapes. Kale fired back, dropped one man instantly. Then the fight turned chaos, smoke, shouting, the hiss of flame. But before long, another sound rose above it all. Hooves! Hannah! She burst through the smoke on Kale's horse, shotgun in hand, her hair wild and eyes burning. "Kale!" she screamed. "Behind you!" He spun, fired again, and the man who'd been creeping through the window fell. The last 2 dropped their guns and ran, disappearing into the dawn. Hannah leapt from the horse, coughing through the smoke. "We have to go. The fire's spreading." But Kale was already hauling barrels of water from behind the bar, dousing flames, refusing to surrender the place they'd rebuilt from ruin. By the time the sheriff arrived with help, the fire was out. The tavern was half charred, but still standing. Kale leaned against a beam, soaked in ash and sweat, breathing hard. Hannah rushed to him, grabbing his arm. "You fool," she whispered through tears. "You could have died." He gave a tired smile. "Maybe, but I wasn't about to let them burn your name off that door." She looked toward the sign above the entrance, blackened but still legible. Hannah's Haven. Her heart broke open right there. "I told you not to come," he said softly. She pressed her forehead against his chest. "And I told you I'm not leaving. You said once that home is wherever I am. Then this time, you don't get to face it alone." Kale's big hands came up, trembling a little, to hold her. For the first time since she'd known him, she felt him exhale the weight he'd carried for years. The sheriff approached, hat in hand. "They'll come back, Ironside. Maybe not tomorrow, but they will." Kale looked past him, toward the rising sun bleeding through the smoke. "Then they'll find me waiting." That night, Hannah and Kale sat outside the cabin, wrapped in a blanket, the stars sharp and cold above them. She said quietly, "When I first met you, you were a storm I was afraid to stand near. But now I see it. You're not the storm, Kale. You're the mountain that holds through it." He smiled faintly, turning to her. "And you're the fire that keeps it warm." They sat together in silence, the wind carrying the scent of pine and ash, the sound of the river steady as a heartbeat. For now, they were safe. For now, the world had given them peace. Weeks passed. The fire scars on Hannah's Haven were fading, plank by plank, replaced by fresh wood and laughter. The townsfolk who once crossed the street to avoid Hannah now crossed it to shake her hand. They brought pies, helped repaint the walls, and whispered that maybe Blackwater still had a soul after all. Kale never asked for gratitude, but it came anyway, in nods, in small kindnesses, in the way men lowered their voices when he walked by. The railroad never returned. Maybe the law had warned them off, or maybe word had spread that Blackwater's tavern belonged to a man who couldn't be bought and a woman who refused to break. On the first warm evening of summer, Hannah stood on the porch of the rebuilt saloon, her hair down, her dress the color of dusk. The valley below was gold with light. She watched Kale in the yard, teaching a young boy, an orphan from the mines, how to sand wood for a new sign. The boy asked, "What's it supposed to say?" Kale smiled, glancing at her. "It says home. That's all that matters." When he came up the steps, his hands dusty, Hannah handed him a glass of sweet tea. "You're building something bigger than a saloon," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just fixing what others broke." She looked at him then, truly looked, the lines on his face, the quiet strength in his eyes, the way the light softened the scar that once frightened her. "You're not fixing," she whispered. "You're healing." He paused, the words catching him off guard. "You too?" That night, after the boy had gone and the lamps were low, they sat on the porch swing, the sound of crickets filling the air. Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder. "You remember what Garrett said?" she murmured. Kale's arm tightened around her. "I remember every word, and I remember how wrong he was." She smiled. "He said he'd use me for one night, but you gave me every night after." He turned to her, his voice rough with emotion. "Hannah Morrison, you are the best fight I ever picked." She laughed through tears. "And you are the safest place I ever found." They sat like that for a long time, saying nothing more. The stars hung heavy, the mountain breathing around them. Down the hill, the new sign caught a bit of moonlight. The letters gleamed faintly. Hannah's Haven, a place where no one's laughter hurts and no one stands alone. At dawn, Kale rose quietly and stepped outside. The mist curled around the peaks, the world still half asleep. He looked toward the horizon and whispered, "You're safe here, Hannah. You're home now, if you'll have it." From the doorway, her voice came, soft and sure. "I already do." He turned, and she was there, hair tousled, eyes bright. She walked into his arms, and the mountain wind carried their laughter into the morning. The world beyond Blackwater would keep turning, loud and cruel and restless. But up here, in the cabin on the ridge, two people who had once been broken had found something unbreakable, not perfection, not peace, forever, just love enough to start again. They said she was only worth one night. But he built her a lifetime. Hannah Morrison walked into a saloon that treated her like a shadow and walked out as the heartbeat of a town reborn. Caleb Ironside, scarred, feared, half wild, didn't save her because she was weak. He saved her because she reminded him what strength really looks like. It's not in fists or gunfire. It's in standing back up when the world laughs. It's in choosing tenderness when life teaches only survival. It's in two people, battered, lonely, half-broken, deciding that love is worth another try. Every plank of Hannah's Haven still carries the marks of fire, just as every soul carries its scars. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The burn doesn't ruin you. It shapes you into something steadier, something that can hold light. So, wherever you're listening from, maybe a quiet room in Manila, a farmhouse in Texas, a coffee shop in Berlin, or a small apartment somewhere in Vietnam, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story tonight? Because stories like this one aren't about cowboys or saloons. They're about us, about the people who've been underestimated, overlooked, or told they're too much. They're about those who've been used and discarded, and the few who choose to build havens instead of walls. If you've ever been laughed at for how you look, where you're from, or what you carry, remember this. You are no one's one-night story. You are someone's reason to stay. Stay a little longer. The next tale, the next love, the next redemption, the next mountain man who stands up when the world looks away is already waiting for you.